This is a Piccolo podcast production.
Welcome to another edition of Adam Shand at Large. Let's talk about Christopher Dale Flannery. Known as Rent-A-Kill, he was renowned to be the most deadly hitman in Australia. If you listen to the legend, this bloke killed more people than the eastern brown snake. But just how true is the legend? Ray Mooney knew Flannery very well, having met him in the 1970s in Pentridge Prison. Mooney was the first Australian inmate to complete a university degree behind bars. He's gone on to a wonderful career as an author and writing educator. I asked him to unpick the truth from the legend of Rent-A-Kill and to cast some light on Flannery's mysterious disappearance in May 1985. Welcome to Adam Shand at Large, Ray Mooney.
Pleasure to be here, Adam.
Tell me, you knew Christopher Dale Flannery?
Knew him very well, very close friend.
How did you know him?
Met him in prison. We were both in prison together. Strangely, we were both there for the same crime. I was guilty of mine, that was rape, but Chris wasn't guilty of his. He was convicted with a fella called Laurie Prendergast of rape in company. Laurie definitely raped her. Chris was there. He was definitely guilty of being present, but he had nothing to do with raping her.
So tell me your first meeting with young Christopher.
My first meeting was in Pentridge. I was in a different division than Chris. I was in what was called A division, which was for first timers. I was pretty young at the time, 23. Chris was in B division, and he was, I think, 19 at the time. A friend of Chris's said, look, I've got this friend up in B division and he's trying to appeal his conviction. He'd been convicted for rape and given 7 years with a minimum of 4. And the friend said, would you be prepared to, because I'd been to university, the friend said, would you be prepared to look at his transcripts and see if you could offer any advice? We met, because I was in a job where I could arrange to meet him quite easily. I read through his transcripts and suggested a couple of points, which he passed on to his lawyers. They were given a retrial. Unfortunately, they were both found guilty again of exactly the same crime and given exactly the same sentence. But it was interesting that there were enough appeal points for him to be sort of found to be retried. We became very, very close friends in Pentridge.
Why did you become friends? Well,
the main reason was I was the captain of our footy team in A division, and we were what was known then as, in inverted commas, the Sucks and the Dogs, the goody two-shoes. And every time we played football, this is the first year I was in 1968, every time we played, they'd bash the shit out of us. And that was a little bit... I thought not how it should be, so I set out to recruit all the tough crims in prison and get them into A division, and I did. I got Chris down to A division. I had Archie Butley, Bobby Barron, Jimmy Pappas, Paddy Chammings, got them all into A division, and that year we won the grand final. We won the grand final the following year because we never got bashed. It was the other way around.
Describe Christopher physically.
5'8". Not a lot of him. He grew bigger later on, of course, but didn't grow any taller. Ferocious fighter. And the reason why he was a ferocious fighter was at the age of 14, he'd been sentenced to one of the state juvenile centres where the Franciscan friars down at Mount Eliza at Morning Star. And as a 14-year-old kid, he was abused in every possible way you could imagine, sexually and physically. But the kids who came out of boys' homes, they fought every day. They were fighting all the time. And that's why they became ferocious fighters. The people who become really good street fighters are those who fight all the time. Not the ones who box and train in the gyms. It's the ones who have to fight for survival. And Chris was a ferocious fighter. He would have been in today, you would have put him in the cage, the octagon today, he would have been Prince of the Octagon. He was a ferocious fighter. And the thing was, and this is even more important, he was what you call a trap. He didn't look as if he could fight. He's a really good-looking guy, pleasant. When he was pleasant, he was pleasant, and everyone fell into him. And the moment you fell into him, bang, you were gone.
In the media and in movies, in Australia in particular, they refer to him as a hitman. In fact, they talk to anyone who's got any form in this area as a hitman. But in the underworld, they don't call them that. They just have expressions like a really willing bloke. Yeah. Does that describe Christopher?
Oh, totally. A very, very willing bloke. But not in prison. This is later on. We're talking. See, everyone's got stages in their lives. You know, I met Chris when he was 18. Sorry, I think I said 19. He was 18 when he went into prison. I met him when he was 18 because there's 4 to 5 years difference in our ages. And there are stages in people's lives. You know, he could fight. He was ferocious, and he was willing, and he was confrontational, but later on, he developed into the person that you've just described. And that's 10 years down the track. And he went through, in prison, he went through H Division, which was the most unbelievable, sadistic, brutal place where screws just flogged the shit out of everyone who was there.
What kind of people were sent to H Division?
Look, the PR will tell you that only the worst of the worst, which was total bullshit. The people who were sent to H Division were those who were on protection for other. Keith Rory, for example, spent nearly the first half of his sentence out in H Division because he was on protection. People who had tried to escape from any country prison, and that's the reason everyone got flogged. Everyone who went to H Division got the shit punched out of them because you knew if you were in a country jail and you tried to escape, you were going to, and you were apprehended, you would be sent straight back via H Division. So no one wanted to escape. And then anyone who broke rules and regulation within the prison was sent there for short periods.
I'm talking to Ray Mooney, friend of Christopher Dale Flannery, about H Division and the role that institution played in creating the man we know as known as Rent-A-Kill. Of course, my guest was also a resident of H Division. Why were you sent there, Ray?
I was sent there because I acted as a spokesperson during prison riots in 1973 when the Prison Officers Union had outlawed any prisoner being allowed to be a spokesperson. During a period of rioting, I was in A Division still at the time, and everyone was talking about should they go out on strike or shouldn't they go out on strike. A Division had never been on strike ever. And the Screws came to me and they said, look, and I was originally one of the two spokesperson officially for A Division under Governor Grinley, who had set up a Prisoners Representative Committee. I was one of the two representatives from A Division. But the Screws, who were the ball and chain union Screws, banned it, and Grinley had to disband the committee. And as a result, it was disbanded. But during these riots, the Screws were terrified that A Division might go on strike. And if they went on strike, then the whole place would just blow up. They asked me if I'd speak to the man. I said, look, I'm sorry, I can't. It's been outlawed. He said, no, we're giving you permission to go and speak to the man. Now, I knew the subtext behind them giving me permission was that they'd expect me to get everyone to go to work. And the moment that I agreed to do it, I went and spoke to all the prisoners. I sussed out whether or not they didn't want to go to work or they did. It was 50-50, and they left the choice to me. And I said, right, we're on strike. And of course, the moment I said we're on strike, that was it, straight down the H Division.
What a ridiculous idea, trying to impose democracy in H Division. Because you contend, and others do as well, and the history also points this direction, that those who went into H Division as quite common criminals, low-level offenders, came out as really heinous individuals. People who blew up police stations, became hitmen, did all kinds of heinous things. I mean, I don't want to excuse or stereotype the H Division experience because you didn't do that. You came out and mostly you're a good fellow.
No, I did it in different ways. Look, even Father Brosnan, famous Father Brosnan, that wonderful Geelong supporter who spent 20 odd years working with Pentridge prisoners, when he published his book, he said H Division took people down there as bicycle thieves and turned them out as murderers.
Because you wrote your beautiful play Every Night about Christopher's experience in H Division and his pushing up against the system and what the consequences were for him. And I guess you're saying that personality change came after H Division.
Definitely. Chris had been sent to H Division 6 times during his incarcerations. He was incarcerated twice, by the way. He was in Pentridge twice, 2 different times, for relatively long periods. Second time mainly for broken parole. But he was down H Division 6, and the first 5 times they punched the shit out of him. And he acknowledged to me, because we were very, very close, that they'd broken him. They'd broken him in H Division. By broken, I mean that he had accepted the rules and regulations of H Division, because H Division was very strict, marching, eyes to the floor, stand on your spot, breaking rocks when you were in labour yards. And he'd succumbed to that, as it did everyone, by the way, not just him, but everyone. And because he knew he was broken, he couldn't live with that fact. And he set out to destroy the place. So with 6 other crims, they all made a pact that they would get themselves sent down to H Division and they'd destroy the place and take the place on. Chris went in and abused one of the chiefs in C Division. He was in C Division at the time. They sent him straight down to H Division. He was expecting his mates to follow the same time, but they waited a week before they came down. And in that week, he'd taken the whole system on. He abused everyone in H Division, all the crims of being too gutless to back him, because he'd refused. He was screaming at the crims non-stop, went on a hunger strike. And Grinley, who was the governor, was smart enough to know, we need to have this factored in. Chris's stepbrother at the time was a lawyer who was outside Eddie Flannery. And Ed Flannery ran the Council for Civil Liberties. He was in charge of the Council for Civil Liberties. And because his brother had been battered inside H Division, he'd spent a lot of time getting the media to have an interest in what was happening in H Division. So simultaneous to Chris going down to H Division, there's this incredible media interest in what is potentially happening in H Division. And the end result of him going down was that they finished up holding a royal commission into brutality within H Division. So he became a very big cult figure, Australia-wide, as a result of that.
And of course that inquiry, as I'm sure you'll tell me, was a whitewash. Nothing happened and the brutality continued, although it was now under scrutiny. Now, so when Christopher came out, when you got out in 75. When did you next hook up with Chris Flannery?
When he got out, I think it was 77, 78.
The disco era.
The disco era. And
you know where I'm going, don't you?
To Mickey's, the disco. You probably owe money for having snuck in without paying. No, Mickey's was down by down the old sea baths at St Kilda, and his wife Kathy, who he had married, he'd married while he was in prison. She became one of the door people down at Mickey's, and as a result of that, she introduced Chris to a fella called Ron Feeney, who was running Mickey's at the time, and Chris finished up working on the door and at the bar and on the door at Mickey's.
You mentioned Ron Feeney running Mickey's, but who was running Ron Feeney?
Well, what people didn't know at the time was that Mickey's had been set up and underpinned by the police, who had put up the money for Feeney to actually buy the $50,000, which it cost at that stage, to buy into Mickey's. And the deal was, at the time, no one knew that Ron Feeney was one of the world's biggest informers. They had no idea that he was a police informer. But subsequently, it became known because he finished up giving evidence at the Fitzgerald inquiry in Queensland and gave evidence against a lot of crooked cops. So it was revealed that ultimately he was a very well-known police informer.
So what an interesting ambiance that must have created. Let me get this right. You have a nightclub that's full of villains and other sundries, that's run by a crook who's just got out of jail up in Sydney, and you've got a guy who wants to become a hitman, supposedly, on the door. You're there as well. You've got you've got a copper called Brian Murphy, who's there every night because he likes to dance, apparently. What was an average night?
Mate, let's get it right, because his psychiatrist told him that the best thing for him would be disco music.
That's correct. How could I forget that? So he was there a lot of nights of the week, and he was being directed by Frank Green, who was head of then the Criminal Intelligence Bureau for Victoria Police. And so they were set out there into this place to gather information, to influence people and so forth. And Murphy became a mine of information for Frank Green, including the early stages of what people will call Christopher Flannery's murder career. Yeah. Now, let's try to put a number on this right at the beginning. How many people do you think Flannery killed?
I would say half a dozen. Yeah, half a dozen. I know the media love to say 12 plus. In fact, people who have written books on Chris Flannery even argue that it's more than that, but that's just total nonsense.
I really only can point to 3 or 4 maximum, and even some of those are disputed. I mean, it starts with Roger Wilson, the solicitor.
Now, before we go on, I have to say this to you, Adam, that as much as I respect you, I cannot go into details of people that will affect people who are still alive. So I will just leave it at numbers rather than names.
Well, let me add this, writer, as well, that I make no allegation that you may have more information that the police might know. But if you feel like you want to unburden yourself, please go ahead. But otherwise, I won't press you. Right. But I think the ones that have hit the press, though, are the ones we could discuss and that obviously made court. And Roger Wilson was the first one. And the story I've heard, of course, that he and this has been on countless TV shows and podcasts, that he has a contract to kill Roger Wilson. Alphonse Gangitano, the later to be the Black Prince of Lygon Street, is involved in this, and Roger is dispatched. Do you have any issue with Christopher having done that one?
No.
Good. Let's move on. Raymond the Lizard Loxley. What happened there, and who was he?
Well, that was the second person that Chris was charged with murdering. In timelines, Loxley was killed before Roger Wilson, and that's a very important thing to put into context. Loxley was a guy who was sent down from Sydney. What we need to be aware of is that Mickey's was also up in Sydney. There was a Mickey's in Sydney and a Mickey's in Melbourne.
I did not know that. It was a franchise.
Oh, yes, totally, yeah. On Mickey's Disco, yeah.
And that was the same sort of setup with the police infiltrating and doing that kind of thing?
Well, it's written, no. It's so much more subtle. We need...
New South Wales subtle? I don't believe it.
It's subtle, I promise you. Here's what people have never known. And all the people who've written the books on Chris Flannery and make out they're the experts have never mentioned. Feeney was accused of murdering a fellow called Jackie Hopper in a disco up in Sydney because supposedly Lenny McPherson had told Feeney that this bloke Hopper had been calling him an informer. So Feeney goes out and stabs him on the dance floor. One of the all-time murders in front of hundreds and hundreds of people. People just keep on dancing, by the way. They didn't know he was dead. They don't charge Feeney, but Feeney gets picked up because he's what's called a coat hanger. That's a person who bounces checks. So Feeney gets he gets time for being a con man, basically.
So let's get back to where we are, Loxley.
Yeah, Loxley. No, we actually missed a very important point, and this factors into it because this is something that you forgot to write in your book.
Sorry, readers.
Your book on Brian, on Brian the Good Cop. You forgot to mention that Feeney was paroled into the jurisdiction of Brian Murphy, a Melbourne copper. He was paroled from Sydney, and it was unheard of. Even when judges heard about this in court, they didn't believe it. They questioned it and wanted proof. But it was true. Murphy was Brian Murphy's parole officer. Unheard of. Then they set up Mickey's Disco. You need to know that.
Now, listeners, I think I did mention this. So at the risk of, I'm going to go to my book, I'm going to publish in the show notes if I did or didn't. And I will cop it if I didn't. I will cop it if I didn't.
It might be in the same paragraph of Chuck's surname.
It might have just been too subtle. I might have just subtly slipped it in.
Here's what you need to also now start to understand. No one knew that Murphy and Higgins had been set up by Frank Green. No one knew this.
This is Paul Higgins, who unfortunately has passed away. He was also later accused of getting involved with a range of blowing up brothels, shall we say, and did a stretch in jail.
And that's important you mention that, because Loxley has supposedly been sent down to run the the Embassy brothel in Ackland Street, St Kilda. Now that's important because arguably there's a little bit of evidence, or there's a lot of evidence, that Chris had nothing to do with the murder of Loxley, but some very notorious police might have.
How surprising.
You didn't know that one, did you?
I didn't.
No, you didn't, I know.
We make no allegations. Let me be clear. Anyone living or dead.
Well, we're allowed to make allegations against those who are dead. That's part of criminal folklore.
Except in Tasmania, where the dead can still sue.
Oh, that's probably because there's so many ghosts down there that, that every door you open, every closet you open, out drops some new information. Chris was charged with Loxley's murder only after the jury in the Roger Wilson murder had found him innocent. The same day they found him innocent, lo and behold, they come up with these statements, supposedly, that Chris Flannery had given to police years earlier, where he had implicated himself in the Loxley murder, which was just absolute nonsense. But it was these verbal sheets given by police on Chris Flannery that was the only evidence that ever got him committed to stand trial for Loxley's murder. Rogerson later on told Chris, "Come on, mate, you don't think we go to trial without the jury, do you?" That's a very important... Chris and Rogerson become very close friends.
We're talking about
Roger Rogerson.
Disgraced Detective Sergeant Roger Rogerson.
Who wasn't disgraced then. And that's a very important... Come on, Chris, you don't think we go to trial without the jury, do you? So there was one on the jury who hung out. So anyway, here's what happens. They retry Chris, but in between the first trial and the second trial, Gomez dies. So the thing is no build, and he never fronts court again on the Lizard. But it was one of the worst things in the world. Now, everyone who's written books on Chris, they've never researched it properly. They've never gone and checked out the transcripts. They always claim he killed Loxley, as if that was... We write that on his forehead. Some terrible books out at the moment that sort of... And some of them are my friends.
And one of the, I guess, the strongest stories that exist is the fact, or the most well-known, is that in 1984, when Constable Michael Drury was shot in his house at home, it was, and the conventional wisdom goes, that it was Christopher Dale Flannery in the company of Roger Rogerson. For years, Michael Drury has maintained, and I don't know how he does because he didn't see who shot him, but he's always maintained that Flannery was the shooter. In an interview I did with him a year or two ago, after Rogerson went to jail for the murder of Jamie Gow, the drug dealer that he and McNamara killed, as we say, Drury changed his tune. He suddenly said, "I believe that Roger, not Flannery, shot me back in 1984. And of course, you've always known this, Ray Mooney. What's your basis for saying that?
One of the things with Chris and I, we knew each other to the point where we didn't lie, and we didn't have to lie to each other. He always denied straight away, right from the beginning, that he did not shoot Drury. He didn't deny that he was involved with Rogerson and Alan Williams in a conspiracy to affect something, but he always said he wasn't the shooter. And the evidence that has never been properly released by the police totally supports that. Drury was shot around 6 p.m. in a place called Chatswood in Sydney.
In his home?
In his home. Now, that's 6 p.m. is peak hour traffic in Sydney at that stage, when 1984 or something. He is on record by witnesses and the signature book of having signed in at 10 to 7 at the Arncliffe Scots Club, which is way over on the other side of Sydney than Chatswood. And
Arncliffe being in the southwest, I think.
yes, that's right. And Chatswood, I think, being in the north or something.
Yeah, on the North Shore.
North Shore. Okay.
North Shore line, you could say.
So it was immediately sort of Chris was immediately put into the mix. You know, you put you do your list of suspects straight away, immediately put into the mix. They sort of questioned him. So I said, no, look, they didn't question him over it, but he let it be known that there's no way in the world it could be him because he was at 10-7 at the Arncliffe Scots. So they checked the book, and sure enough, there's signatures above and then they go and get all the other witnesses who were there who said, yes, he was definitely there at 10-7. So here's what the police do, and they do this 10 different times. This is absolutely true, this. They get out at Chatswood at 6 o'clock, and they do every possible thing they can do to time getting from Chatswood to Arncliffe. An hour and a half was basically the average time. There's no way in the world it could have happened. That's the reason why Chris was never ever questioned over Jury's shooting and was never charged over his shooting. Everyone goes on about all this nonsense, about they didn't want to do this and blah, 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 because there was no evidence, absolutely no evidence it was him, nothing whatsoever. Later on down the track, Alan Williams admits that they had met previously with Rogerson and Flannery to talk about upping the bribe to Jury to see if he'd change his mind. If not, they talked about, well, should we go about putting the bloke off? This is both Rogerson and Chris together. Chris said it definitely wasn't him who pulled the trigger. Now, when Gow's murder trial came about, McNamara got up in court and said that Rogerson admitted to him that Flannery was fucking hopeless. He was full of coke and there's no way in the world he was going to let him anywhere near a gun. He went and did the shooting himself. That was given in evidence. Hardly made front page news. Why? Because it upset the entire narrative of films like, or series like Blue Murder, books like God Sear's book on In the Line of Duty, all this stuff that's been premised on the fact that it was Chris Flannery, and so much has been written about the fact that it was Chris Flannery, and it wasn't him.
And of course, you can always put stories like that on the dead man, which is kind of what's happened in Flannery's case, where Rogerson over the years, and I've interviewed him several times before he went to jail for the murder of Jamie Gow, and he talks about Flannery coming up to Sydney, working for Freeman, and just getting out of control. Something had to be done about the bloke. He was just completely, the Melbourne instinct came out in him, and he had to be put off. And it was extraordinary. It was virtually, it showed this was an insider of a conspiracy about a bloke that just needed to be out of their lives. What did you know of Flannery's motivation in Sydney at that time before his death?
There's no doubt he caused havoc. Like, he took them on. he thought that the old guard were weak. Their day had come, and he knew that the old guard didn't have really strong values, that they were actually bickering with each other. The Freemans and the Lenny McPhersons really disliked each other and were quite prepared to go behind each other's back to undo each other, despite the fact that when they were all together, they were best of mates. But Chris knew the truth, that they were on their way out, although they still had the power. They totally had the power. They controlled the gambling. They had big interests in the prostitution. They ran a lot of the rackets. They were still in control, but there were up-and-coming people. And the up-and-coming Crems were the ones, and there was another group, Barry McCann's group. They were the up-and-coming group that were actually about to push out the old guard. They knew that because there were so many attempted hits on prisoners like Tom Dominican and Chris and both their groups were sort of actually fired at, that it was out of control. The police were really coming in hard on putting pressure that nothing happens while this is all happening. No one's making money. The drugs are all not coming in. Nettie Smith and his group, they're standing around watching. No one's making a quid. And they're all under threat because someone had tried to kill Chris his wife and his 12-year-old daughter outside the front of his home with a machine gun, and it was just a poorly executed attempt, but it was fair income. They tried to kill him.
Who did Christopher think it was?
At the time, he didn't know. Later on, he was given paid access to the federal illegal taps. They were illegal. The federal police were tapping everyone, politicians, crims, everyone who they wanted to tap. They had all these tapes on RAN, all of them. They had the federal police, and Chris paid for the police tapes. And on those police tapes,
he paid for the police tapes. This is obviously not something you can buy over the counter.
No. I was in a back room at Chris's place in Arncliffe when he'd given Rogerson $1,000 to have a look at. Rogerson wouldn't leave me, only let him read them. Let him read the tapes, and in it was Dominican arguing with McCann over the botched shooting of Chris. Now that's what and when Rogerson had gone, I said, mate, come on, you don't know that's fucking true. Like, you just paid $1,000 for creative writing. How do you really know? He said, I trust Rogerson.
Big mistake.
Totally, because in the end, that's what put him off.
Because Christopher wasn't idle while he was in the city, but far from it. He's connected to at least 2 murders. That of the heroin dealer Danny Chubb, where it's suggested that he and Nettie Smith might have been involved in that one, and Tony Eustace. Yeah.
Oh well, Tony Eustace ultimately got killed, but it had that, and everyone blamed Chris, and as a result of blaming Chris for killing Eustace, who was Chris's very close friend and supplier of ammunition and supplier of funds, and he was doing cocaine deals with him, he'd be the last person that Chris would have killed, and there's no way in the world he killed Eustace. But that goes against the narrative. The narrative is, oh no, Chris would take money to kill even his best friend. And the truth of the matter is, he'd been offered money to kill Sayers, and he had totally knocked it back. He said, I don't kill friends. By the way, earlier he'd been offered a lot of money through Tom Erickson's, through insurance companies, to really give Norm Gallagher a ferocious hiding. He said, why would I do that? The bloke's a really top bloke.
It's a very discerning hitman. I don't think you can have much success with a business model like that. I don't kill friends. I don't kill women. I don't. All these different things. I mean, I'm starting to doubt this image that he was very successful at all. Maybe it was all hype.
No, I think what you're starting to doubt is that maybe the narrative was all hype, and it's police narrative. This is all police narrative, and no one questions police narrative. We take it at face value. We want to trust it. We want it to be right, but it's not. Like, they will put out a narrative that suits their cause. They always have and always will. And I understand that, by the way. I don't have a problem with that. But we've got to be realistic here. Chris didn't kill Eustace. There's no way in the world he killed Eustace. No way in the world. And the facts don't support it anyway. If you go and look at the real facts, it's sort of like a Mercedes car pulls up. Who's got a Mercedes car? Oh, gee, George Freeman. Now, why would that happen? Well, someone wanted to make out it was Freeman. It wasn't Freeman either.
And Eustace didn't help matters because he wasn't killed outright, and he had the chance to give up who shot him, and he drew them in close, and they thought they were going to get something, and he goes, get fucked. And that was it.
And the reason why he had no idea who shot him was shot in the back.
I'm sure he had some idea.
No.
Okay. Anyway, we got to agree to...
He would have known who arranged to meet, but he wouldn't know who shot him. But he knew it wasn't Chris. Chris was waiting in the Hilton Hotel to meet him.
Fair enough. As Rogerson told me, Flannery's days were numbered when some of these things were going on. What's your version of what happened to Christopher Dale Flannery?
Rogerson's right there. He's right. I have no doubt in the world that Rogerson totally organised it. No doubt whatsoever. That was the payoff. Look, the only way we get back to normality here is we have to get rid of what we have declared is a hothead and is a troublemaker. And by the way, at that stage, Chris was hiding out for people who were trying to kill him. And he was wary of the police, he was wary of everyone. The only person he trusted was Rogerson. The day before, he'd met with him in a hotel. under some feeble excuse from Rogerson that, it's good if you come and talk to these coppers and let them know that you didn't have anything to do with juries, blah, blah, blah. And the reason why that was so that Chris could be followed, and he was followed. They were very, very good at that. They knew that he was in the Connaught Hotel, opposite where the police were. He was living in the Connaught Hotel.
It's in Rushcutters Bay?
Rushcutters Bay.
In the eastern suburbs?
And if you look at the narrative that happens, here's the most important point. Chris was, at the stage, was being paid still by Freeman. Freeman was still paying his what you call expenses, giving him cash in hand all the time. Now, and I'll jump a little bit. When Chris disappears that morning, Kathy knows at midday. Kathy's Chris's wife. And he calls her every hour, every 2 hours. It was unbelievable. His phone bill must have been worth more than bloody your superannuation, mate. You know, he calls her all the time, and she hasn't heard from him. She knows straight away that he's off. She contacts Freeman because supposedly Chris was supposed to go and meet Freeman. Now, Freeman had 2 wild dogs, and they were Chris was terrified of dogs. I don't know why he was terrified of dogs, absolutely terrified of them. And he'd always ring at Freeman's house to say, "I'm here, lock the dogs up." Kathy rings Freeman. "No, mate, he never contacted me. It didn't arrive." Kathy says, "Okay, I'll go and check all the police stations." She checks everything. She gets back to Freeman, and she says, "I think you know something that's happened. What's happened to Chris?" And he tells her to fuck off. There is no way in the world that Freeman is going to tell Kathy to fuck off if Chris is not dead. No way in the world. No way in the world. So Freeman's part of it. Rogerson set it up, and they've put him off.
Because the version that's, I think, got into TV shows and things is that Rogerson lures Christopher to Freeman's house on the pretext of a new machine gun. This is also what I've heard from other underworld sources too, by the way, Ray. So just don't stop me here. I'm on a roll. Don't stop me. This is the final scene, very important. So this is the version that I've been told, that he's taken to Freeman's house. They're in the garage there, and he's going to show him this gun, and it's a machine pistol, and he pulls it out and drills Chris full of holes. He's then put in a boat and taken out to sea, and that's the last we'll ever see of him. You know, how close do you think that is to reality?
No way in the world. And you left out Stan Smith. Look, there's no way in the world that Freeman was stupid enough to have it happen at his place. No way in the world. And as it is, like, the police are there straight away the next day. They don't know about Freeman's secret cavities until Kathy tells them about them.
This is not in his body, by the way, in his house.
This is in Freeman's house. And of course, when they get, I don't believe that Chris would have gone anywhere. I reckon what's happened is that when he's left the Connaught Hotel because his car has stalled and not started, and he's gone outside, he's been picked up by coppers he knew. I have no doubt that's what happened.
And dispatched where?
Okay. One of the things that Rogerson used to brag about was that when, Chris, you're a deal. Every time you've knocked someone, you've left their body for us to find. When we knock a body, do you know what we do with it? And he took him and showed him where they burn the guns in the furnaces. This is how we work, mate. This is why Chris trusted Rogerson 100%, because he revealed some things that no one ever knew.
So you're saying that Rogerson stage managed the whole thing, and that Flannery's body was probably incinerated?
Yeah. Now, by the way, I wasn't there, so I really do not know. I'm just putting all the facts together, looking at it from a criminal aspect, that this is how I would have been doing it. By the way, that other stuff you were talking about, I wrote all that in The Green Light, the book I wrote. That's where they got all that, about the machine gun.
Fair enough. And I might send Roger a little letter to say if he'd like to dispute this version of events. I'll send it to Long Bay Jail and the serious and old offenders unit.
Let him.
Let him what?
Send it to him. Let him dispute it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, he's not going to admit it, is he?
We have to keep this conversation going. So Christopher will never be seen again and his body will never be found. But you're left with a strange memento, which says a lot about Christopher Dale Flannery and his love of sports. What is it?
Well, it's a cricket bat, a handmade one, carved out of wood, not willow. not as good as the ones you've got here, mate. Yeah, it's a bat that Chris used to have. It's interesting.
He liked a bit of impromptu street cricket, did he, or was it for other purposes?
No, it was for other purposes. Everyone used to sort of talk about, you carry a baseball bat in your car, blah, blah, blah. But if you got pulled up and you've got a baseball bat in your car, how are you going to explain that? But if you get pulled up and you've got a cricket bat in your car, well, hang on, you're an Australian. Everyone plays cricket.
And so he would use this. See, this is why there's a cunning plan in this question. At the outset of this interview, you said 6 people he killed. We've talked about 3, you've conceded about 2, I think. So we've got about 4 there. And I wonder, in the application of some correction with said cricket bat, there might have been an accidental death or 2, do you think?
Look, I don't really know, because unless you're there, all you're doing is going on rumour and innuendo, and I don't really know. What I do know is that the narrative is that he was 10 times worse than what he really was. The narrative that has been put around, and if you look at what underpins all that narrative, the people who I'm talking about have written all the books, it's all police information. It's all what the police have said about him. None of it's gone and researched and gone deeper than what they've said and challenged that research. None of them have challenged it and sort of looked at, well, hang on, why are we still saying he's the person who shot Jerry when everyone, when at the subtextual level they know he wasn't?
And we'll put this podcast out and people will just say, that's not correct. Yeah. And the conventional narrative will remain. Yeah. What did Christopher think was going to happen in this? Because I really liken him in a modern parallel to Andrew Venyman, who, having seen the brutality of the Carlton crew, was driven into the hands of Carl Williams, but also he'd come from this background where all his friends were dead, and he had this mission in life that he was going to take as many of the dogs down as he could. And I wonder, when you look at Christopher Dale Flannery's trajectory from boys' home to H Division to so-called underworld hitman, what was his motivation at the end of the day? Just pure revenge, hatred against the world? Was he dirty on the earth, as people say?
No, he was. Look, we've talked about this once before, Adam. The thing that makes a really good crim is how willing they are to continually be a crim. They're never lazy. They're always busy. They're always doing things. They're always wanting the next rort. They're always planning ahead. That's what makes a good crim. The top crims that you know, especially, look at the people you wrote about, the Delaney's and all. Look at them. They never stopped. They were always doing things. They always had things on the go. That's what makes a really good crim. That's what Chris was like. He never, ever stopped. And as a result, once he had sort of achieved something, it was very hard for him to just relax and enjoy it, because there was something else to do. There's always something else. There's always another thing. And to even get one thing achieved, you often have to put out feelers everywhere and be associated with a lot of people. So he's all the time dealing with people continuously. And as he matured, and he did mature, as he matured, he realised that he was more courageous than they were, and that he was always going to get to the top, always. He underestimated Rogerson. That was his biggest mistake. He trusted him. When I say underestimated him, he trusted him. He explicitly entrusted him as a friend. He trusted him.
So you could say that Flannery was another victim of success. We all know how to handle failure. That's easy. Success tends to come up and mug us and sometimes shoot us in the back of the head, as occurred with Christopher Flannery, I'd suggest.
Yes, sort of, but remember there's a little bit more to it than that. To actually be successful, you have got to ultimately prove not only are you willing, but you're capable. There's a difference, a big difference. Now, he was always willing. He was capable. But he was blindsided because in his capability, he was led by people who had other agendas. You know, the Nettie Smiths of the world, the Rogersons of the world, they had agendas, very strong agendas. And if you look at those people, they have always used people all their lives. And everyone those two people I just mentioned have used have all come undone. They've always come undone. Everyone's come undone. Everyone involved with Rogerson came undone or got killed. Everyone involved with Smith came undone or got killed. And that's what ultimately happened to Chris. He was nearly there. But events took over. The last conversation we had, I was with him in the Connaught Hotel, and I said, mate, look, they're going to put you off. He said, I know that, mate. I said, well, go overseas. Not in me, mate. It's not in me. It is not in me. I'm not that type of person. I'm not running from anyone. In fact, I will walk down fucking the middle of King's Cross to let them know who I am, which is what Tom Dominican did the moment that Chris had disappeared. That's what he did. He went down to all Chris's places and said, here I am, I'm still here. That was he knew, Chris knew, but that was the type of guy he was. Look, it'd make the greatest television series of all time.
They wouldn't believe it. They wouldn't believe any of this.
No,
they want the story they've already got that they believe that conforms to their perceptions of reality. But we'll continue on an Adam Shand at Large to talk about these stories and try to keep them alive because, and thank you for being...
Well, let me just say this as
It's my show. I'm going to cut you off in a minute, right?
Okay.
We're almost at the end. I'm going to give you the wind-up here.
Okay. But the real story is better.
I agree.
That's what I want to say.
But it is confronting, it's uncomfortable, but some people still know the answer. You know who I'm talking about, Roger. Write to us from jail. Let us know what really happened then, and maybe we can split the movie rights when you get out when you're about 150, okay? Thank you so much for being a guest on Adam Shand at Large. And I think we'll get you back, actually, in the coming weeks to talk about how you went from H Division inmate to author, playwright, screenwriter, and writing educator. Thank you so much for your time today.
Good on you, mate. Be a pleasure.